Japan has a problem with black companies. And so I'm going to share with you my personal experience, the experience that my friend has had here, and then most recently, and definitely the worst of the three that I'll share, it's the experience that my fiance has had. And then to tie up the second part of the video, I'll talk a little bit about how these black corrupt companies uniquely manifest in Japan because of course every single country is going to have corrupt companies, bad corporations, of course, but each is of course unique given the sort of cultural context of that country, and Japan is no different, and I think that's a very interesting part of it. So to begin, let's talk about my friend and the experience that he had here. So he was going to start working for a company. He'd moved over from Japan and everything was pre-set up for him so that one of the major things he would be assisted with was having an apartment to live in. And that meant, you got to pay the key money, you got to pay everything you would expect. And everything seemed good to go. He was just going to move on in. But just before he did, he got a call from his manager, and his manager assured him that everything was just as you would expect, except for there was a little bit of damage in the apartment. And so they just needed to pay that, or my friend needed to pay that, and then he'd be able to move in, no problem. Which, if you feel a sort of emotional recoiling from that request, it means that you're a normal human being. What this is that somebody else had damaged the apartment, not paid their damage deposit, and now this was being tossed off on my friend before he was going to move into the apartment. He's at a loss. He feels cornered because he doesn't want to upset them. And he just said, like, what do I do? Do you think I should say something? I said, absolutely. So I gave the manager a call, and I worked for the company at the time. And the manager said, oh, well, it's just like a small thing. If he pays it, then he'll be able to move in. It's not a big deal. And I said, absolutely not. This is clearly that it's somebody else's damage deposit that should have been used for this. And you cannot legally tell somebody who's moving into an apartment to pay somebody else's damages. You're crazy if you think that's reasonable. And I think we were just lucky in this case that because we pushed back a little bit and it was so plainly obvious that this shouldn't happen, the manager said, all right, I'll see what I can do. I'll speak to them, the apartment management company, and maybe we can have them deal with it instead. And lo and behold, they did. So my friend, it's not some massive amount of money, but $300, $400, that's a lot to a person who has just spent so much money to move over to the country. And it really would have put him out of pocket for all the other things he would have had to spend money on at the time, like furnishing the apartment and everything else. So a really nasty experience that he had. Now I could talk to you a little bit about my one personally. Maybe this will be a little bit cathartic for me. So this is the company that I most recently worked for. I only worked for them for a month because of this kind of stuff that they did. And I thought, you just got to get out of here. They're going to keep doing this kind of thing. I shouldn't expect them to change once all the negative behaviors stacked up. So I was hired to be a teacher trainer. I got like a decade of experience. It seemed like kind of a cool evolution where I was like, okay, well, I won't teach anymore, but I would be happy to share knowledge. I enjoy doing that. I like mentoring. And so it seems like a cool job. And I went through all the particulars of my contract with them, which is what you want to do. Make sure your role and your responsibilities are well laid out so that there are no miscommunications when you begin your work. And I was assigned to this prefecture that I was in, and I was going to go around and train people. But then it started to happen very quickly, within a week, in fact, that they started to send me out of prefecture. So I was going on these, getting up at 5 a.m. and then traveling 3 hours in the morning to go and train somebody in the prefecture over. And I had to call them up on it and say, like, guys, this is labor law violation. You cannot have misrepresented your contract and gotten me to go and work in these other prefectures. Like, if anything, if there's such a significant change to my contract, you need to discuss it with me, and then I would sign something else, or we would expand the responsibilities, or you would compensate me differently because I'm going to have to go above and beyond and drive all over the place going crazy. So that was one thing. Brought it up with them, and they said, "Oh, okay, no, you're right. You're right. We shouldn't misrepresent the contract like that. We can have a discussion about it maybe down the road." So I'm like, down the road? That doesn't sound good. But that was the first thing that set me off, where I was like, I don't like this. The second one was that it was very clearly stated in my contract that I would be working for elementary school, junior high school, and high school. And those are the different schools that I would go to, and those are the sort of teachers that I would be training, because that was my experience. That's where I could actually be useful. And then out of the blue, they tell me, okay, we want you to go again to the prefecture over, and we want you to train at nursery schools. All due respect, I love schools and I love the work of teaching and training, but I don't want to go to nursery schools. And had I known that that was a responsibility I had, it would have been a very different conversation when I signed up and signed the contract. And this falls under the same labor law regulations that if you drastically change the scope of work that somebody has, there needs to be some sort of discussion, change in compensation, new contract. And when I brought it up to them, their excuse in this case was really funny. I said, so I can't do this, guys, or like without a discussion about it, I don't feel comfortable doing it because it's not in my contract and it goes against labor law. And they said, oh, well, but Dave, we make everybody do that. And so this is laughable because it's basically telling me we essentially violate labor law with everybody, Dave. That's just how we operate. And it should therefore be acceptable. And so I'm thinking, I mean, I told them, I said, look, guys, because you violate labor law with other people doesn't then make it acceptable to do so with me. To which they conceded that was a good point and they wouldn't do it again. It's like, okay, you guys got some real head scratchers here. And then the next one, and this had to do with pay. So again, to my contract, that's what all this stuff has to do with. That's how you protect yourself. I worked, or my schedule was Monday to Friday, and that's when I would be expected to work. But then on one of these business trips, they had me going out of prefecture again and working over my weekend. And I said to them before that, or I said as I was going away to the trip to my manager, I said, oh, just by the way, like, I want to confirm as I do this, like, that's obviously overtime, right? Because you're getting me to do work outside of my regular work hours, which this is over the course of the weekend. And his response, he was a good dude, but he's just pulling the company line. And he says, oh, I don't think you do get paid for that. Like, I don't think that's the way it is. But if you're really concerned about it, you want a final answer, go one person up the line in terms of the hierarchy of the office. I went up the line and that guy said, oh, no, you don't usually get paid for that. I'm sorry. That's just not the way it is. I was like, no, that's not true. And he was like, I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything else. You won't get paid anymore for that. And so I went above him to his manager and said, look, you guys are once again finding yourself in labor law regulation violation, and I need to be paid for this because it's like it's a non-argument. You can't do this kind of thing and then not compensate people properly for it. And she conceded, all right, only after like heavy back and forth. And she says, we'll make an exception in this case that yes, you will be paid overtime. And I had to push back on that and say, no exceptions. This is labor law. If you make me work outside of the hours agreed upon in my contract, the working days, then you have to. And she gave up the ghost and said, all right, well, going forward, if we ever did make you do that again, then we will pay you properly. I was like, okay. So I got to about a month of these shenanigans with these people, these jokers. And then I said, I'm parting ways. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to wait another week to have another labor law regulation be broken by you guys. I can just see the way that you're treating me, and it's going to be throughout the company. I'm not exceptional in this case. This is the standard here. I think this is just how you guys operate. So that's my personal story. That was my personal experience with it. But now we arrive to the most egregious, the most brutal of all, which is the story of my fiance. So she works as a UX UI designer. She does great work. She's actually done work on our product website, which I would have flashed across the screen at some point. And I love it. She does great stuff. She was working for a company as a UX UI designer, as a contractor, and things were okay. But then she shared with me, not soon enough, actually, I wish she'd shared it with me sooner, that they were missing payments to her and promising that they would arrive to her later. And I thought, well, that's really suspicious. Like, if that continues to happen, you got to let me know, and we've got to do something about it, because that's you being taken advantage of. You're working for free if they're always going to be late getting you payments. And unsurprisingly, it continued, and it got to the point where I said to her, you've got to have a talk with them and say, with all due respect, guys, if you are going to continue to be late on payments, I cannot continue to work until you provide those back payments to me. And then I can pay my bills, I can pay my rent, I can survive. And when she confronted them about this, they gave her the whole, well, you need to be flexible. This doesn't sound like you're a team player. It sounds like you don't even want to work for us anymore. And she said, no, that's not it. I just need to know that I'm getting paid. And they said, oh, it doesn't sound to us like you actually want to continue. And she said, well, tell me this. If you guys can make the next month's payment when you owe me that money for, say we're in January, will you be able to pay me for this month of work that I'm doing? And they said, no, we can't guarantee you that. So she said she had to go. Very smart move on her part, I would say. And this is where things started to go even crazier. So about a week later, she's sitting on the couch and she looks really upset, and she's got some paperwork in her hands. I said, what's wrong? What's you look really put out. Why are you so upset? And she says, oh, it's just, I really don't like this exit contract they've sent me here that they want me to sign before I leave. And my ears perk up, and I'm thinking, exit contract? Like, no company ever in the history of corporate function has ever required an exit contract that I'm aware of. Let me see the thing. So we put it through the AI, and the AI points out several illegal clauses. And if she had signed this contract, it would have ruined her. They were doing all sorts of crazy stuff, like where she was a contractor and owned her work for them. They were saying that they now owned it. They said that where she was free in her current contract to be able to speak to any of the clients that were associated with the business that she was doing with them, if she spoke to them, she could be taken to court. And so they were trying to sneak in an illegal contract as she left to control her life. And I said, absolutely not. You tell them that all you're going to do is operate by the agreement of the current outstanding and legal contract that you have with them. There's absolutely no reason that you should be signing anything new. And to save this from being like a 40-minute video, we won that argument, as we should. And they didn't make her sign that contract. Okay. So we move on to the next step. She uses a software called Figma, which you may have heard of. So Figma is like the Photoshop for UI UX designers. You use Figma to make all of your designs that you're going to give to developers, and developers can reference it for whether it's web development, app development, anything like that. In the course of her working with this company, she had shared files to them, and she woke up one morning to discover that they had gone into these shared files and deleted all of them, all of these files that she would have used for her personal portfolio. And we had to have an argument with them where they said, oh, no, those belong to us. We're allowed to delete them. And I had to remind them to reread their own contract that they'd signed with her, which is that she is a contractor, and so those belong to her unless otherwise stated in the contract, which it was not. And they then, after we threatened to take them to court, agreed to restore those files to her. And you can associate this with, like, what would you say, destruction of personal property. It would be no different if she had gone into, say, one of their offices and they had hard drives there and broke those hard drives. She could be taken to court for that. It's no different if they do this to her. If they destroy her personal files, that's destruction of personal property. And they had to concede that this was the case and restore them to her, and they did. But then the royal stinking rotten cherry on top was that after all that mess was done, they were weeks late on when they had agreed to pay her. And we did phone calls, we did messages, we did emails with them, and it was always going to be one day later, one hour later, that it was going to arrive to her bank account. It never did, and then they refused to speak to her anymore, which meant they were just going to try and pull a, we'll just disappear into the ether and hopefully she'll go away. So she's obviously distraught, but very patient, and says, I just don't know what to do. I think I just let it go. I said, absolutely not. I said, we are going to take them to small claims court. They are criminals. They are stealing from you. They tried to destroy your property. They tried to enslave you through an illegal contract. Let's stand up to these bullies. Let's do something about it. So we went through the work. We compiled all of the evidence. We submitted it to small claims court. We got the court date set, and we went. Now, these cowards did not even show up to the court date. And when punctuality and showing face means so much in the Japanese society, you can imagine that it did not look good for their case when they did not arrive and faxed in their evidence on the day of. That's when the court received it, their nonsensical arguments as to why they hadn't paid her. We won. So by the end, it didn't take that long. There's not that much to deliberate over when no one shows up and you have this mountain of evidence that says that you're right. And so she was awarded full, whatever, not damages, like full compensation for the amount of money that they still owed her, which was significant. It was about a half a year's worth of back payments that they'd missed out on. And we thought we were out of the woods. We thought we'd done it. We thought that we'd finally had justice served. But then, of course, they have a brief window, which is about 4 weeks, in which they are able to consider whether that they want to appeal the court decision. And 2 days before that window closed, they did. And so we had to go back to court again. And get this juicy little detail that did help us, that the judge that would preside over the next court case is the same judge that already ruled in our favor for the first one. So he's not going to be too fond of these guys appealing when they didn't even have the balls to show up to the first court case. We've gone to the second now, and it's a little bit more time to be taken, but the judge has given them an impossible task to produce evidence which will say why they haven't paid her. And I'm 99% confident that that's not going to be an issue, because they have no evidence. They already lost the first case. They just delayed it by then appealing the decision. So we'll get to the end of this, and, c'est la vie if we can't ultimately win. But we did win already, so that bodes well for us. Now, I want to talk about giving you all of these examples. How is this, or how in my opinion, is this like a uniquely Japanese thing, or why does it show up here? And I would say it's because, or the way that it shows up here, is in that it preys off of one of the most beautiful elements in Japanese society. So there's a number of phrases in Japanese for letting things go, but the most popular would probably be Shoganai, which, if you did, I think the most common translation of it is It can't be helped. And to the Western ear, we might associate that with just giving up, but it loses a lot of the nuance of what that is trying to convey, which is more associated with some Buddhist concepts of something like Mujo or some Stoic philosophies, where it's that when confronted with things that are beyond our control, that we accept them as a course of life. Life has good moments, life has bad moments, and rather than fight to kick and scream against the things that we cannot change, we should accept them, and then we'll flow with existence much more easily. It grants the Japanese people an incredible patience in the face of adversity that I have seen. Adversity that I have seen. And I have a profound respect for the Japanese people in the way that I think their ability to not sweat the little things is amazing. And it conversely, though, means that I think a lot of Japanese people, when confronted by these kinds of challenges, would rather shoganai, would rather flow with the experience than fight it. And it allows them to be picked on and bullied, which in my opinion is the most insidious thing in the world. Which is that you would take the virtue of someone and turn it against them. It's that these Black companies feel like because people are so patient, because they'll flow so easily, that it's just so easy to push somebody over because they won't push back. And I hate that. You know, what is another expression I like? It's that if you want to know the true character of someone, judge them by how they treat people that they view as having less power than them. And textbook case in her example, she's a woman, she's a contractor, you know, just bully her. Like, it's going to be no problem at all. And they did not account for her strength. And I'm very proud of her and what she's done and how far along we've gotten with this. I would like to add a little bit more incredibly important nuance to the end of the discussion as we finish out the video here. Sad that this is probably mostly what people will have not heard because they disappear after the first 2 minutes. Why? When I make a video like this, it is not to bash Japan. I love Japan. It's a beautiful country. But loving a place does not preclude an open discussion about its strengths and weaknesses. And in fact, I think one of the things, whether for ourselves or the countries we live in, that means that you show that you care truly about it, is that you can have an honest conversation about not just your strengths, but about your flaws as well, which this is. And also, as I said, that when I talk about this in Japan's problem with Black companies, doesn't mean it isn't elsewhere in the world at all. It's everywhere, but it is unique given the context of that country. And so again, I think another fascinating reason to have a discussion about it. So thanks very much for listening. If you have had experiences, maybe we could make this a very cathartic video where we can all share the good and the bad. You know, maybe a counterbalance could be that if you've had great experiences with Japanese companies, love to hear about it. You know, I've had good experiences here too. If you've had bad experiences, let's share that too. Let it be a cathartic experience where we just share and hopefully we have something productive, whether that's the way that you got through it, the way that you persevered, important life hacks that would be useful to somebody else. Who knows what it is, but I welcome it all. I appreciate you checking out this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.